So I'm glad to be here with all of you, and thank you very, very much for being a part of this. You're going to hear today from four incredible individuals as our main panelists, and we purposefully wanted to hear what was happening from the state of New York, from the city, New York City, from Wisconsin and Los Angeles, wanting to be able to hear about particular local strategies. We have the commonalities of us regressing and the potential for us regressing extensively in our good work of it that we've been doing over the past decade. And we can't have that. So you're going to hear some very specific strategies and just what's happening on the ground. As you know, many of you have been in this work. Many of you have been shoulder to shoulder working extensively of bringing systems together. And New Ways to Work has been one of those organizations that have spent a lot of time working with entities, agencies, localities about bringing systems together. And as COVID is going to challenge us and has challenged us in ways that have been completely unknown to us before, we're going to need to talk about systems, and we're going to need to be able to do it at scale. And we're going to need to be able to have the best practices of how to do that. So we're just happy to bring us all together to start this conversation. Solutions, are going to come out, but we know that it's going to be developing over time. So we're very happy as New Ways. We have some great partners, and we'll hear from Henrik in a minute about Relay and our great partners at CSUN. So I really want to thank Henrik and Ruben from CSUN of helping put this together. I do want to really acknowledge Brett Halverson, who was the inspiration of putting today's session together, and he's been the longtime board chair of New Ways to Work, and of course Steve, who corralled all of us and made us turn in all of our homework over this last week to make sure that we have a top-notch session for you. So with that, I'll turn it back to Henrik, and thank you all for being a part of this.
Thank you very much, Robert. So today's session is co-hosted by New Ways to Work. And New Ways to Work has spent the past 3.5 decades working with policymakers, local leaders, and youth practitioners to improve their practice and to define better ways to connect organizations and leverage resources to prepare youth and young adults for the future. Also co-hosted by Relay Institute. Relay Institute, it's a creation of CSU 5 within Los Angeles. These are the 5 California State Universities: Cal State Northridge, LA, Long Beach, Dominguez Hills, and Cal Poly Pomona. It is the first institute of its kind that it's across 5 campuses and brings the resources of faculty and centers in order to specifically work with the opportunity youth and those youth that they are either they have been involved in foster care, juvenile justice, homeless, or high school dropout. And collectively, we bring the resources from research, instructional design, and innovative ways of thinking. So there are going to be 2 themes for today. And what are the most critical issues, barriers, conditions, opportunity youth face in gaining access to and advancing into good jobs and careers in the current economic climate? And what are some promising approaches or practices you're aware of that address those issues and provide access and opportunities for these youth and young adults? So these are the 2 themes that we are going to have for today's meeting, this forum. So there are issues dealing with agenda flow that we had to welcome from Robert, but what are the issues? What does data tell us? And we'll hear from shortly from Keisha about this. And what are the youth saying? And then we will have the 4 perspectives, as Robert mentioned, from practice leaders will share their sense of the challenges and solutions experienced by opportunity youth in their communities. And then finally, we are going to come up with next steps. Where do we need to go and how can we get there together? Before we continue, I would like to talk about the rules of the day. So if you have any questions, you could use the chat box and you could type in your questions. My job is going to be today in order to monitor the chat box and convey the questions to the presenters. Post your questions using the question feature. So put a question mark first and then type in the question so we know it's not just a comment or a statement, but actually you're asking a question. If you have any technical difficulties, this is my email address. That's henrik.minassians@csun.edu. So feel free to email me and I will simultaneously check my emails on my phone to make sure that everyone has proper access. And this forum is being recorded and it will be shared with attendees shortly after the conclusion. It will take 24 to 48 hours. We will have a copy sent to Steve and the New Way so they can post it on their website. And we will also have a copy on the Relay's website. So with all this said, I would like to turn the screen to our presenter. Let me pull up the screen, which is Keisha.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Henrik. I still see your face, but that's okay. So thank you, Robert, Steve, Brett, for inviting me today. And I'm glad to be here to kind of set the stage with some new data that we just recently released from CLASS. CLASS is National Policy Organization, focuses on anti-poverty strategies as well as racial equity. While I'm talking, I just want to share this website. You can go and look at it. Maybe my colleague Dewey can put it in the chat, which he already did. It's New Deal for Youth. And we have wanted to, I guess this time last year, we knew we wanted to be able to look at some trends around economic justice, around safety, health, mental health. During the Trump administration, we did not know we were going to be in the middle of a pandemic. So we also looked at some data to see how young people were faring during the pandemic. And we looked at the Census Bureau's household pulse survey data from April to July. You can go to the next slide. And so what we knew intrinsically, all of you out there, as well as we'll hear from the other speakers, is that the crisis young people are facing is not new. What we know is that the pandemic, the racial justice uprisings, as well as the economic recession has exacerbated the issues that they were already facing. So when we were experiencing, the country as a whole, experiencing relatively low unemployment rates, we knew young people were still suffering and their unemployment rates were at least twice the national average. We also knew that those who did manage to make it to post-secondary education options were also saddled in debt. We knew that health insurance and access to mental health supports was a challenge for many young people in low-income communities. And well before, the world saw the part of the racial justice uprisings and protests, we knew that young people didn't feel safe in their communities, and Black and brown young people in particular were over-criminalized in their schools, at risk for harassment, arrest, injury. You can go to the next slide. So the crisis isn't new. So as an anti-poverty organization, we're always wanting to look at who is living in poverty. And what we found is before the pandemic, young adults were suffering across all race and ethnic groups, but more likely to be living in poverty if you were a young person of color. And we also saw that when we looked at declining poverty rates across the board, there was a gap between young adults and national poverty rate. So again, it gives you a sense of why we need to prioritize young people in general and then look at opportunity youth. You can go to the next slide. And this next one, I already talked about it, but again, this is when, you know, many folks were touting that we were at near full employment, but all of us was doing this work in our communities, in our states, nationally, and knowing we knew so many young people who were not employed, who were not actually attached to meaningful work or opportunities that they chose for themselves. So that's before the pandemic. You can go to the next slide. And so then we have the pandemic. We all get shut down in March. I don't know how many months that is at this point, facing new shutdowns again. And we had the largest stimulus bills that pumped into from the federal government in history. And what we knew, according to language, that youth and young adults could benefit, but we knew that their specific needs were not prioritized. And so as advocates, we were trying to make sure that as folks were focusing on the public health crisis, what did that mean for young people in terms of access to cash and finances? What did that mean so they could actually access unemployment insurance, paid family and medical leave? Many of them are young parents themselves, childcare. And much of the funds went to state and local government assistance, education institutions, but how did that support and reach their particular needs? And this is what we heard from young people themselves. You can go to the next slide. So Measure of America, which I'm sure many of you know about, has been tracking the number of opportunity youth each year. And they define it pretty narrowly based on not connected to school and work. But what we do know is because of many of the efforts of folks like y'all around the country, and we'll hear from some a little bit later this afternoon, is that we have made really good progress. The number of opportunity youth as defined by out of school, out of work had been going down. And they released a report early on during the pandemic. It said a decade undone. They're estimating that upwards of 6 million, or at least a quarter of all young people, will not be attached to work or school. And we know with school closures up and down, and also the problems and issues with virtual and distance learning, that's probably even an underestimate. I really like this report because it really gives you a breakdown to other categories. If you're living in poverty, if you're living with a disability, without a high school diploma or with just a high school diploma, and other different factors, you can see who are we talking about when we're talking about opportunity youth. Next slide. So we found, and this is what should make all of us, like we are in what is next and what should we do, is that young people are experiencing brutal unemployment rates and they're not being centered in any conversations. So this shows you just across race and ethnicity, the unemployment rates during that we captured during the pandemic. This is brutal. Next slide. This is what they reported. Over half were unemployed or out of work due to the pandemic. We know what industries were impacted. And so we know many of our youth and young adults that we support and work with and advocate for were in those industries. So over half were unemployed and out of work due to the pandemic. Next slide. This is the one slide that really gets me as a national policy advocate working with many of you, is that we had the largest stimulus package in history. But as reported from this Pulse survey, more than 90% of unemployed young people reported that they were unable to access any income. And it's a broad question, but that means that whatever we were trying to do with unemployment insurance or whatever says that they were unable to access any income. And we see questions coming up in the chat. We'll try to answer them today, and if we can't, we could follow up with them. Okay, next slide. So one of the things we try to really think about as we think about economic opportunities, other issues that are connected that young people face, and I'll just flag one of them, which is around healing and well-being, health insurance, and mental health. And Dewey will probably dump some of the other ones in the chat that we looked at around safe communities. You could go to the next slide, but I think this is particularly important for us to think about as we think about we're also in the middle, of a public health crisis, right? And so during the pandemic, between and through 2018 to 2020, the rate of young adults without health insurance has increased. So what does that mean for their access to important critical care and important mental health services and healing? And what can we and in our roles do to support that? And then the next one is super alarming as well. And we're all facing anxiety and depression and on edge. But what is this doing to our young people? And nearly 2 in 3 young people expressed that they were feeling down, depressed, hopeless. What does that mean for our strategies to be connected? And so the last slide, I just wanted, as a policy and advocacy organization and advocate, you can go to the last slide. Just wanted to share a little bit about what we're thinking and how we're working on some next steps. So beyond policy reforms, defining and demanding what's needed. This data, and coupled with what we'll probably hear from what the young people are saying, is frightening. We need to do a better job. So we have to focus on the public health crisis, at the same time, equitable recovery. We have to create a vision with young people and for them. Our scale of the solution should match the scale of the challenge. We don't need just boutique programs. We need large scale solutions to match the unemployment rates and mental health crisis they're facing. We need to focus on opportunity youth, communities of color, as well as those who are living in low income and high poverty areas. And we need to really think about immediate and long-term solutions. And I think we have an opportunity now, but we have to really lift up what's working on the ground, as well as really couple that with what young people are experiencing. I'll turn it back over to you, Hendrik, and happy to take any questions now or offline.
Actually, what we're gonna do is thank you, Keisha, thank you very much. I'm Steve Trippi, I'm the still Executive Director of New Ways to Work for another few minutes here. But now we're going to go to Lori Collier, who has got the voices of some young people that are engaged in her organization and working with the Los Angeles Opportunity Youth Collaborative. And Lori, do you want to introduce your video to us for a second? Give us some context.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Lori Collier. I'm with the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative and also with the California Opportunity Youth Network. And we have some young people that are going to talk a little bit about their experience pre-pandemic, kind of right now, and as they look to the future. And I want to point out that in the video you're about to see, because it's a video, it doesn't go as deep as some of the struggles that these young people have actually faced. And so this is kind of them on video talking about their circumstances, but the work goes much deeper. So if there's questions around this, our young people have faced many of the issues that Keisha has talked about, particularly around housing and homelessness that has come up during the pandemic, also with access to mental health services. And so we'll kind of show the video and let people have a look at what youth have to say.
I was living in a shelter, working 2 jobs, and just trying to find my way out of the little box I found myself in. Now, I end up moving into a house I share with like a few other guys here. It's not bad, it's decent on price wise, at least something that I feel like I can personally afford. But it has impacted me regarding like career opportunities. See, I haven't been able to find any real work aside from like little odds and ends of part-time jobs or just like day gigs that pay minimum.
A couple of days before pandemic, everything shut down, I got a voucher. I was trying to look for a place because the place I was living wasn't feeling, I was really miserable there. So then I just decided actually to like look for a place, and then that happened. And I was still planning to go to school, but the thing is the pandemic kind of threw it off. And I was also, it was really hard for me to find a place, but I was able to like do it in the knowing that there was a lot of like social distancing going on and lockdowns, and trying to ask for apartments. A lot of landlords didn't want to like accept people with Section 8. I got hired in 7-Eleven like in July, and now I'm just working in my savings to go back to school. I had a chance to talk to my welding instructors a couple of days ago, and they're motivating me to go back like in summer or so, because I think they're gonna have more of like structure in the class and everything going on. I feel like I do need like more like there's probably workshops to like, you know, go around the whole pandemic thing. Like, okay, well the GR is not open, so how do I apply to food stamps? Or like Section 8 is once my paperwork, how do I navigate that knowing that they're closed? Is there other techniques in it so I won't lose my Section 8? Or stuff like, oh, how do I go back to school in 5? And when everything's so digital now.
I guess the only barricade I can really see is just like having a stable position somewhere. There's something that can provide me enough income to cover ends meet on a daily basis for anything I might need. That's also, like I said, I think most of my barricades was financial. I just don't happen to have it right now. So, and COVID just made it that much worse. So.
So let's open it up for questions. If you have any questions for Keisha or Lori, could you please throw them into the chat box, or Henrik, do we have any at this point?
Yes, we had 2 questions so far, and the question number 1 was when we say unemployed, are we talking about part-time and full-time or only full-time?
Yeah, I just put the answer in the chat. It was, the question is report work within the last week. So it's just any work.
And
That was
also,
the,
there was another question. Do seasonal workers fall under part-time?
well, the data set that they added to augment to figure out what was going on during COVID pulse didn't ask whether you were a seasonal worker or anything like that. It was just saying, you know, were you working? Those were the questions that were asked.
There is another question, says, what if any programs, resources are currently in place to help youth get work regarding COVID-themed support?
I don't know, Lori, do you want to answer that and talk a little bit about how y'all were working and responding to what the young people have been doing?
Sure. A lot of our work has been around translating government benefits into youth-centered language so they understand how to access and what to do. Most of the things that are coming out aren't really directed for youth to understand. So we spend a lot of time translating that over and then helping young people understand where the access points are, or even trying to help them show like how to do different things using technology on their phones, because that's not how they use technology. So trying to help them learn those things. And making sure young people knew about all the different resources that are coming out, especially locally, to support rent assistance or landlord tenant issues with some of our local legal advocacy organizations. It spans the gamut. Mental health issues. We have found youth have come to more online convenings basically to support one another. So attendance has gone dramatically up when we've talked about bringing youth together. And that really hinges around the isolation they felt over the course of the pandemic. And then of course, cash resources and making sure that, you know, as opportunities are made available to us, we're passing that on to young people, helping them with food, paying rent, making sure they have access to technology to go to school. What Estolia was talking about in the video is she is in a welding trade, and there has been no way to convert a welding trade education to an online format. So she's just been stuck, and that's where she got a job at 7-Eleven to like fill in the gaps. So it's a gamut that we're trying to fill. And then working in partnership with all the other organizations that are doing great things to make sure young people know what's out there and available to them.
There are two questions for you, Lori. Is LA proposing a young adult recovery agenda? And are those messages regarding resources in video format?
So there's the collaboration that happens in LA as part of the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative and also the Los Angeles Performance Partnership Pilot. And those two initiatives are focusing on foster probation, homeless youth, and also youth who are disconnected from school and work. And so we reinforce one another's message across LA County. And then what we also do is then connect out and push out our resources, particularly for youth, on social media. So Instagram has been their choice. The youth that you saw are part of our youth council. And what they've told us is that if you want to get information out to youth, you tell us, tag us on social media, we'll put it out to their networks. And that's what we've been doing since March. We started an Instagram page, and that has been the kind of secret sauce to us spreading information across the county. And so part of what LA is trying to do is then partner with the California Opportunity Youth Network, so then we can work together to spread that across California, because LA isn't the only ones doing these resources. These resources are available to all young people in California.
Thank you very much, Lori. Now we have 4 perspectives from the field.
Yeah, so I want to introduce 4 women who have joined the New Ways to Work board at different points in their careers, and they're all serve on our board. But they all are all leaders of organizations that are actively engaged in both seeing what the condition is for young people right now, but also engaged in solutions at different levels, at the statewide level, in the community colleges, with workforce programs, with United Way systems, and with place-based collaborative initiatives. Not exactly how this is going to work in this format, but we have with us Alex Davis, who is the executive director of the Los Angeles Orange County Regional Consortium. Alex, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Steve, how much do you want us to say? Are you just going
I'm going to do introductions, and then
okay.
we'll throw some questions at you.
Okay, great.
Melinda Mack from NIATEP, the New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals.
Hi, everyone.
Charlene Millay, United Way of Wisconsin.
Hi, everyone.
And Marjorie Parker, Jobs First New York City.
Hi, everyone.
So what I'd like to do, and maybe we can just quickly go around and first sort of get your reaction to the condition of young people, and what do you see in your system, in your community, with the people that you work with. And why don't we start with Melinda Mack.
Steve. So one, I mean, anytime I get a chance to listen to Keisha speak and share their perspectives, I always take everybody up on that offer, because I think some of the data coming out of class is some of the best. And it's directly derived from young adults, which I think is really important in terms of the perspectives that we put forward. Statewide in New York, and I'm going to not focus on New York City because Marjorie really is the expert on what's happening in the city. Just like everyone else, we're seeing a spike in COVID statewide, which is actually pushing many more districts and young adults who have not been engaged in remote learning into remote learning, likely for the duration, probably till the first of the year. And so I think one of the pieces that we're continuing to be really concerned about is just the overall ability to reach and support young adults who are in school, but are likely to become out of school youth relatively soon. Again, similar to what we're seeing nationally and from the data, many of the positions that young adults typically used to occupy, whether they be in retail, hospitality, working at a movie theater, we just don't have those jobs anymore. And in fact, many of folks in the hospitality and retail sector aren't expecting to really return to work until 2022 or 2025. We saw in the New York Times reported recently. So I think one of the last things I will mention, and this is sort of a learning from the last recession, and we're seeing it play out again, young adults tend to really be an afterthought in terms of public policy when so many adults are out of work. And so what really is the structure that we can engage, especially as we think about recovery, potentially more money coming out of a stimulus at the federal level to really inspire and support a young adult agenda in addition to the adult agenda to support return to work, education and skill building, but also economic mobility, which we know is crucial to any sort of young adult success over the long term.
So Alex, how does that play out for youth and young adults that in the community colleges that you're working with, particularly in the context of sector-based career studies?
Yeah, so let me just give some context how massive Los Angeles and Orange County is. So there's 2.1 million students enrolled into the California community colleges across the state of California. And my region represents about 40% of those students enrolled. And of the disadvantaged students across the state, we represent a third of those students. And so across 29 institutions. And so looking at the California Policy Lab data that came out early on when COVID first started to impact the workforce, we found out that of the total claims, the unemployment insurance claims that were filed, the students between 16 and 19 represented 28% statewide of those claims that were being filed. They're the smallest population in the labor force, but 49,000 out of 530,000 of young people between 16 and 19 filed claims. And that number has risen since then. And so it's critical to community college because we have a natural partnership with secondary education in that many of those students begin to take college level credit courses, which we call dual enrollment. There's an articulation agreements between our colleges and the K-12 system. And that's critical because it speeds up the progress for them to obtain credentials. By the time they get to the community college, they can be halfway done with a credential. And so, so COVID has impacted them in a way that there's a lack of connectivity to classes now that we're in this remote environment. And for most people, it's a foreign environment because they weren't used to taking classes online or whatever remote space that have been created. And then there's problems with access to devices for them to connect. And there has been some cases where students have been driving into the parking lot of AT&T and Starbucks just to get access to online. And so as a collaborative in LA, we've been discussing how to fill the gaps with the digital divide and how we can bring on technology partners to help us remedy those issues for our students, especially in high school and community college, where the space where we work in. Our region received, just like across the state of California, our region receives a strong workforce program funds to help sponsor career pathway programs that lead to living wage jobs. And so we're still trying to get that work done and doing hard pivots in times of this pandemic to make sure that work continues forward and being responsive to jobs that are emerging as a result of the pandemic.
Okay.
So Steve, I'll stop there. There's so many other things happening with our young folks, but I'll stop right there.
I think we'll want to dive in a little bit later and find out what those pivots are specifically.
Yeah.
But let's sort of stay on the issues here. Charlene, as someone who works in communities across Wisconsin and families, how is this playing out for organizations like yours and the people that you touch?
Hey, everyone. You know, as you said, we really are looking at the topic from a different perspective. United Ways in Wisconsin are working very closely with community partners, and what we're seeing play out is kind of what's been lifted up here. It's just an exacerbation of what already was a problem. So we see, particularly for young people in Wisconsin, you know, we only have, you know, less than 6 million people in the entire state, so not as massive as LA, but we see great disparities. Madison and Milwaukee have some of the highest disparities for Black and Brown households and in the country. And so we're already seeing the disproportionate effect of a really good economy on those households and young people. And we're just seeing that, you know, grow tremendously, and we're concerned about issues such as that have already been discussed as well: tech, access to tech, internet, are people able to even continue working, and things like childcare and housing. So we're seeing more and more young people with families having to, even if they are able to work, leave the workforce because of childcare and the instability of our childcare system, and then housing, particularly in a cold climate like ours. Living outside isn't an option in the winter here. And so we're really, really concerned about people's just safety in terms of surviving the pandemic and the large amount of evictions that are happening here for young people.
It's getting depressing. Marjorie, how's this playing out for youth in the inner city in New York and the young people you work with?
Thank you, Steve. Congratulations again, Robert, for joining the New Ways team. I look forward to your leadership. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Jobs First, because I know many of you are new to us. We are a workforce intermediary in New York City. Our focus is on creating and advancing solutions that break down barriers and transform the system supporting young adults and their communities in their pursuit of economic opportunities. We work with about 160 partners across the system here, across the 5 boroughs. Those include investors and colleges and workforce agencies. We're a neutral partner. You know, we bring diverse partnerships together through a collaborative change process as we effort to make changes at scale. The way that we do our work, and I'll talk a little bit about that and how that's affecting us, we really focus on community educational work. So community is really creating localized solutions, and Steve mentioned place-based in his Homeland conversation that really respond to the local needs of communities. And I think this is going to be critical as we look at where young people exist in large numbers that are not connected to school or work, and our population is primarily focused on those who are out of school and out of work, and those who are in danger of leaving K-12 without any post-secondary options. Our work also focuses around how do we identify, design, and advance a kind of practice that brings, look at employer demand and what challenges employers are having, and we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of solutions. And using the work across community and across education, across work, really figure out how we advance the kind of policies that we think will produce better outcomes for young people. So the issues that we're having that are pandemic related is right now New York City faces a multi-billion-dollar budget shortfall. We have substantial cuts to training and employment program. Young adults in their communities are already being set up for what we think is going to be a very difficult recovery. And then since the statewide pause in March, and we just went another close down, so young adults have experienced a disproportionate share of job loss and are likely to remain unemployed after the shutdown. So this past summer, we engage directly with about 70 institutions and did a couple of field convening. We produced a report called The Early Impact of COVID-19 on Young Adult Workforce Development. It does capture many of the things that Keisha covered around household finances declining, around having a job has become a matter of life and death for a lot of young people. They need to help support their family, but they don't have health care if they get sick. Young people have greater challenges getting jobs, internships, work-based learning experiences. And in the nonprofit stuff, and Keisha mentioned some of these, there are rising mental health and physical health needs in this place. And I think in our earlier conversation, and I was on a little bit earlier, talk about just how the transition to remote teaching and learning, it's just not meeting all the needs of young adults. And we know over time that will negatively affect their learning, their skills development. So what we are now is, I'll put the link in the chat. We have between 259,000 to 324,000 young adults who are out of school and out of work. And this is May, June numbers. We're doing that scan again. So that's about 27% to 34%. So this is just across New York City, right? If you're in a place like the Bronx, it's 41% of young adults between 16 and 24 who are out of work and out of school. That number was down to 16% before the pandemic. So, the early data is showing us that 35% of young adults lost work, higher than the citywide average. Enrollment in our community colleges has dropped to 23%. And the number that we're trying to find out, and the Department of Education is not revealing, is there are unknown numbers of students not re-enrolling in high school. And there's been significant cuts in the budgets for these alternative high school programs, where kids who were in danger of becoming part of the out of school, out of work population, they would do well in these small schools. Those schools just had big budget cuts. So that's really what the condition looks like here in New York City. And so, Keisha said this before, and we all know this, that, prior to COVID-19, the economy was seemingly strong, but across New York State, and Melinda mentioned this, young adult unemployment rate was pretty high. The economy was not actually working for them. So we think that any effort, led by policymakers or our sector in recovery should be really careful not to focus on preserving the status quo, which as history has taught us may drive greater inequality across the US. I'm gonna stop there on the challenges, and I can pivot later back to what we think are promising approach.
So what, if you're comfortable, why don't you roll with that right now, Marjorie? We don't have to go in order. Just tell us, if that's the condition, what is jobs first, or the people around you are you looking at that's showing promise and that you're investing time and energy in? What are the alternatives?
So, as an intermediary that builds our policy work based on the practice work that we launch on the ground. So we, all of our work is through collaborative partnerships. And if something we build works, then we try to advance the replication and expansion of that. So I think, first I want to say that there's been a great deal of conversation regarding systems and systems change in an effort to help young adults connect to better opportunities. But I do think that in order to achieve this much anticipated change, COVID-19 really presents us with the opportunity to really step back and develop a map and understanding of the system. What is this young adult system? What are the parts? Who are the stakeholders? We need a clear articulation of the status quo we are trying to transform, and then a new vision for what could be if we work together. And we have a future of work young adult systems change map on our website at jobsourcenyc.org that I can put a link in this document here in the chat a little bit later. But we think that some things that we have worked on that we think make sense to expand, and some things that our partners have worked on. One is, we think that this was a good time to take a closer look at sectoral employment strategies. I think it's important for us to understand where jobs are growing, and in those sectors where the jobs are growing, what parts of those sectors are friendly to young adults with limited work experience. How do we get them connected to more opportunity? In coming out of the 2008 crisis, we launched a young adult sectoral employment project that brought employers together and other industry partners with the nonprofit sector to design a very successful initiative that reconnected over 2,000 young people to work, to education, to jobs, and they're still in place. We think that another strategy is a place-based approach. There's all the system stuff, and we think that's wonderful. But what we think haven't been done really well is taking place, looking at what's happening in that place, and working with those local communities to develop their own transformation plan and help them figure out how to resource it. We think that young people can do well, but they do better when their communities are doing better, and we know that's a fact. And so that a place-based approach, we think, can help with a lot of that. We have quite a few examples of that on our website. The employer-led initiative, so I don't know if I heard someone say this before, we have the CEO Jobs Council that just launched here in New York City. We have one in New York, but we have some predecessors to that. Howard Schultz and Starbucks launched the 100,000 Jobs Initiative, where they brought all their employer partners along to that. I think we need some more of these employer-led initiatives. Our sector needs employer champions. We need employers who are telling their colleagues and their friends that there is a robust sector that is not staffing agency, that is not a college, and that's not a high school, that can really respond to their needs. We think work-based learning and internship and in-depth career exploration, like what CareerWise is doing here in New York City, or the work that that we've undertaken, which Steve knows really well with New Visions for Public School, around really figuring out how to connect folks to kind of better quality work-based learning experience, but how to build work-based learning experience in a remote hybrid work environment. And CareerWise, if you go and look at their website here in New York City, they're doing some really good work around that. Something that's harder, I think, and we've been skeptical about, I was on a call this morning with some organizations that do entrepreneurship. We think every young person should learn entrepreneurial and get entrepreneurial leadership skills. And we think that's important for folks who won't enter the traditional job market. And because there's an increase in part-time and gig work, that it does take, some of these skills to, if you're doing a gig work and you want to build your gig strategy and your gig engagement and your gig brand, that learning some of these skills early are going to be helpful. And you may not build something or start a business, but it does play a critical role in how you advance at work. And the last thing, and this is, I know we've been hearing a lot about this. We're a big proponent of it. I'm putting a piece out on this next week, a thought piece out on this next week. We need a WPA-style public works program. We think that a new WPA can be an equalizer to offer young adults opportunities, so another generation doesn't lose out on important income and economic security gains, as we saw with millennials after the Great Recession. I'll stop there.
Well, that's a heck of a list there. We've got employer-led, place-based, on-the-ground, work-based learning, entrepreneurship, and a federal investment in a WPA program. Melinda, what do you think of that? What are you seeing play out?
Yes, and we actually have to fix some of the structures. I think there's a lot of structural work that has to be undertaken because we have inequity in many ways built into a lot of the structures we've created. And so I think a couple of things that we're really interested in tackling as part of the recovery are removing, in many ways, artificial barriers like prior learning credit. And so we figured it out with early college, but we haven't figured it out by way of example if you're a veteran. So if you're a young adult who's a veteran who's returning and ready to use some of your GI credits or educational benefits in the public education system, if you go to one of our state universities, you may get one set of prior learning credits. If you go to another, you get a different, right? And so often what happens is young adults in particular are bouncing around, either trying to find the best deal or sort of churning in and out of public institutions because they're not able to make the right fit or right match in terms of post-secondary education. I also think that there's significant work we need to do around thinking about equity as it relates to the digital divide. And so we've done some work statewide to really think through the New Way Forward report around the fact that broadband is necessary, it's required. Again, I'm thinking about Charlene in Wisconsin. I'm sure you're seeing similar issues. I feel like upstate New York and Wisconsin are very similar. But it really comes down to the fact that like broadband is accessible, people just can't afford it. And if you're a young adult who's on your own, you may have access to a phone, but you may not have access to the right data plan in order for you able to connect and participate long-term in many of the programs that we're sort of initiating. I will sort of go back and forth on the WPA style plan. And I say that because, having read significantly in the last 8 months around the Works Progress Administration, there were some real benefits and there were some real negatives in terms of the way the WPA rolled out nationally. I would actually like us to really think strategically around what does this mean in terms of our reset, in terms of our relationships as a public workforce system with organized labor, especially as we really think about college to career, or really high school or non-high school pathways to career through public labor unions. And we haven't done a great job in terms of really inspiring, supporting, really thinking about young adults of color and their participation in organized labor, whether it be the building trades. In our state, if you want to participate in clean energy, you probably are going to be in IBEW, which is an electricians union. I think we need to really be thoughtful about how we structure these pathways. And then the last thing I will say, and Charlene mentioned this as well, which is, I'm on this panel with all these smart people. So the good news, I can underscore the things they've already said. But one of the big things that I worry about is access to public benefits or supports that typically parents are accessing on the family's behalf. So for example, if you need childcare, if you need food assistance, but you're claimed as a dependent, you're probably not able to access some of these benefits that are actually essential to your ability to participate. And one of the things that we're finding is often we need flexibility and funding to just cover 1 month's rent, not necessarily your training, because you might be eligible for training dollars through another source. And so really ultimately, how do we start to think through that structurally? Oh, one last thing I will say. Federally, we have to think about loan forgiveness, debt forgiveness. If I talked to one more young adult, I was on a meeting this morning with young adults, and sort of their inability to apply for student loans or be able to access public education, meaning post-secondary education, because they've defaulted on student loans at one point in their lifetime. We're creating all these barriers that really just put people behind, that we have to figure out structurally at the federal level moving forward. So make sure your advocacy for the young adults you have on the ground as fervent at the federal level, especially as this next administration gets structured.
So thank you, Melinda. Charlene, can you talk any bit about examples of solutions to this access to benefits and supports that you're seeing in your state?
I don't know that it's a huge mystery other than what's been lifted up here, navigation. How are we breaking it down so that, it's difficult when you know these systems to navigate them sometimes. And if you don't even understand, one, you can't access it because of access to broadband or just access to internet anyway. So in Wisconsin, everything went online, and literally there are places in Wisconsin that are still using dial-ups for getting connection to the internet. And kids that are accessing online virtual classes of any sort previously had to go to the library 20 minutes away that are now closed. So, I think it's really trying to figure out, how do you navigate systems? How do you make it simpler so that people can access the supports that are there? Because in Wisconsin, we see an underuse of the childcare subsidies and some other subsidies because people just don't understand it. And then how are we reimagining how we put it back together? So there's some other things, and Steve, I don't know if I'm trying to keep all of these thoughts that everybody's saying in my brain in any kind of order, and I'm doing a miserable job. But the other thing I was thinking of as people were talking is, as we're putting things back together, how are we solving for things like in Wisconsin, of the full-time jobs, half of them are hourly. So young people are typically in service jobs or jobs that, in our state at least, they're paid hourly. And with COVID, there's no support that if you get your hours are cut because all of a sudden a business has to close, or the client you're serving can't see you because they're sick or you're quarantining or whatever. There's just no stability, and it's very frustrating. So the emotional supports and the economic supports that are connected to kids that are really trying hard, and that disproportionately impacts the population we're talking about today. The other piece, I think, in terms of solutions, so what we're seeing is we are seeing, what seem like maybe small ways to address removing barriers, those things being put into place. So we're seeing a lot of kind of more grassroots trying to solve situations and working outside of the government systems as a way to provide immediate assistance. So what can we take from those things that are getting tested out there and try to get that incorporated into our public systems so that the public systems are improved? We're seeing efforts like in Milwaukee where they're trying to just, this was pre-COVID, remove, if a barrier in first kind of interaction with law enforcement for boys of color was because you didn't have a driver's license and you needed to try to get some employment, you get pulled over and you get a ticket. How can we remove the barrier of just affording to get a license so that we give people a leg up and don't have them start off, with the deck stacked against them. So we're seeing things like that, just try to move with accelerated pace. And the one other thing I would say is like employer-led initiatives. So the other thing we're trying to do here is really help our employer community understand that their experience is not everybody's experience, because the decisions they make are based on their own experience. And how can we really help people understand the issues about tech equity or internet access, the issues about eviction. We can have an eviction moratorium, but come January, you're still gonna have all that rent due, and now you have penalties, and you might be getting evicted anyways because there's ways to get around it. So I think some of those things were lifted up. So we're seeing solutions and trying to get at how can we help people understand really what the situation is. And unfortunately, because more people are being impacted, we're finding that people are a little bit more ready to hear it, that this is an issue than what we knew previously was already a problem. I don't even know if any of that made sense, but throw it back to you, Steve. Oh, you're on mute, Steve.
Charlene, I know that you're responsible, or your organization is responsible for 211 in Wisconsin, and that's not something that sort of pops up as a resource in the youth workforce development field or really in education as a resource. Is that something people should be looking to as a way to get at some of this infrastructure information out there kind of thing? And how do people do that?
Yeah, dial 211. So 96%, unless you're in the city of Chicago, and they're soon to fix that. And in New York, it's 311. But looking at connecting into that system and making sure that the services that you want your young people to be aware of are part of that system as well, so that people get connected. We saw in Wisconsin, so 211 is available throughout our state. 100% of residents can use it. People don't know it's there necessarily. And virtually every public assistance program has been funneling through 211 to get people connected to how to plug in. So I think that's a really good place to look. And 211 is the type of system that it is been thinly funded, like many things. And so instead of making an immediate judgment about what 211 is in your community, help to make it better, because it is a very easy way to get connected to services and typically available 24/7.
Thank you. Alex, you before were talking about some of the pivots you've had to do to re-engage students and deliver instruction. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, particularly in the context of the study that you did around which certification and labs could be delivered?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the socioeconomic impact to our communities and our students is a real issue. However, keeping them engaged and making sure they're not disenfranchised as we made the pivot to online and remote instruction is real critical. And I'll tell you why. There are many programs, career pathway programs, that are hard to convert into the remote space. If you think about heavy machinery and equipment, nursing, welding, fire technology, which is almost impossible to convert. Some other programs are automotive, advanced manufacturing. If you could think about all those programs that require skills verification on equipment and machinery, those are serious implications of why enrollment may have declined, right? Because as we did that pivot, we didn't have time to think about those things, but we did commission a report that identified the top 12 programs that are hard to convert. And as a result, we're bringing together the ecosystem. We have employer partners on board. We've got all of our workforce development partners in both LA and Orange County involved. And we're really bringing together the ecosystem and vetting virtual platforms like Z-Space, sorry about that, or Interplay, and Labsters, and Transfer VR. And we're trying to create economies of scale so that when we bring these platforms on board, we work with the distance education leads on the campuses and have those vendors to come in and do orientation with our faculty on the back end, but also on the front end with our students, so our students are acclimated. We've got students that are really suffering and have been experiencing trauma as a result of being thrusted into this online space. There are students at the K-12 level that are getting 25 assignments a week to complete, right? And there's not enough resources to help them organize and even navigate their way through that. And then we have to continue. I think it was Janice and I chatting, the whole dual enrollment. We can't just throw that out the wayside, but the lives of our students are hanging in a balance. But there are infrastructure solutions that are coming, and we're trying to be flexible enough to bring those platforms on board and re-engage our students. Many students are just used to having instructors right in front of them, both at the secondary and post-secondary level. They are comfortable with having a faculty in front of them, someone they have immediate access to, and they're just not finding that resource available to them through the online environment. So we've got a lot of work to do, but it's an opportunity to bring our ecosystem together, which is answering the call to get on the other side of this digital divide and a lack of resources for our students.
So before we get to questions, thank you, Alex. Before we get to questions, I'd like to ask each of you to close with a comment around what you see the role of collaboration among organizations on the ground in communities as being a critical mix in the solutions that are coming up. You all have touched on it and you haven't really talked about it. Melinda, you're up first.
Sure, thank you. And I also want to say thank you to everyone who's kept their videos on. It's always so nice to see real human beings when you do this. I think collaboration is a few things. I think it means, one, challenging the norms. So I say this because I know we talk a lot about employer-driven collaboratives, but I think in this generation of work, the employers also have to shift their models, recognizing that their models didn't work in terms of making sure that especially young adults who are Black and brown have access to good jobs across your states and across your communities. I also think it means really thinking big, but being practical about the solutions you can create. Recognizing that Marjorie and I were just on a call earlier today around let's think really big and then back into the things that we can control and things that we can change, and use our variety of strengths to be able to make that a reality. And I'm just going to underscore the last thing, like advocacy is so undervalued and so critically important, especially during this time of transition and change. I know many of you are Californians, and I know many of us are New Yorkers, right? We tend to be a little bit further on one end of the spectrum here, right? But in reality, our ability to influence what happens in DC is critically important to the success of young adults. And so I encourage you to raise your voices in advocacy and collaborate with your partners, especially strange bedfellows, to do so.
Alex, same question, role of collaboration?
Yeah, I'm along the same line of thought process of Melinda. The ecosystem, do what you do naturally and not try to expand your services in the time of a pandemic, but build capacity. And we are, and that's the calling card for all of our partners here in LA and Orange County, is doing what we do well, but also looking at how we did it pre-pandemic and looking at how we need to shift and do it after the pandemic. I think organizations will benefit from creating their organizational tasks to leverage the skill set of their workforce instead of building a task first and then trying to find a workforce to come in and advance the vision and mission of those companies. But I think the spirit of collaboration is going back and using the ecosystem, the natural roles of the partners in the community. So I'll stop there.
Charlene, collaboration?
Yeah, it's critical. And, I concur with my colleagues that answered this question before me, so they got to take the those points. I would add or reinforce, look for new partners. So some of the things where, we sit at United Way, really kind of this look across our ecosystem of community services and partners at a different level than when you're in the trenches. And I would say, lift up, and instead of creating things from scratch, look at who's already doing that and maybe needing to, that could shift and help you, particularly as we need to respond so rapidly in this environment right now. So example, in Wisconsin, somebody had ordered diapers from FEMA. We had 9 semis turn up one weekend, 3 months after we ordered them. And we had to figure out how to get that throughout the state. Looking at who does that work already instead of figuring out new transportation routes to get diapers out, that our Department of Children and Families had never had to do that before, looking at new partners. Another example would be, we work in systems where oftentimes people are being referred to us or they reach out. And how are we turning outreach and also benefiting young people? I'm really, really concerned about isolation and people feeling alone. And I think our young people are hesitant to reach out. So how can we use community partnerships to look at how do we reach out in different ways? And so we've looked at, again, similar types of skills in other sectors of the community services ecosystem, but how do we engage them in doing what we need to kind of solve a problem? So I would say those things would be critical, and the advocacy, figure out how your unlikely partners can help tell the story of what is really happening so people understand that their experience isn't the experience of everyone.
And Marjorie, you get the last word here, I guess, stealing Lawrence O'Donnell's thing.
I have to say, Steve, you just spoke my language. It is our secret sauce. It's what we think. Collaboration is the mechanism we think that can transform just about everything if you do it right. That's, transform workforce development, transform system, transform what happened at the community level, transform policy work. In New York City, NITEP, the organization that Melinda runs, Jobs First and Young Invincibles, then the New York State Employment and Training Coalition, got together and then brought all these folks along with us to convince the governor of New York State to invest money in workforce development. And through a lot of pressure and a lot of employees had a lot to do with that, he set aside $175 million for workforce development. And we thought, with COVID, he's just going to run away from that. He stepped out and recommitted to it. And I was just telling Melinda that in New York City here, 42 organizations have already gotten money from that pool of resource, at least $180,000 a piece. And so collaboration is the secret sauce. We call it our secret sauce. When people said, well, how do you do your work? I'm like, it's our secret sauce. It's called collaboration. I think that we adopted a lot of the private sector approach to our work. And we thought that we had to go on these individual brand building kind of thing. We had to be a man on an island by ourselves. In the nonprofit sector, when you're working at human solutions, we cannot take that approach. We have to figure out how we can collaborate, not for us, for the people whose lives we're trying to change. If we want to change anything for them, then we must do it and we must figure out how to do it. So I'm glad that that was your closing question, Steve, because I think it is what we don't do as well as we need to, and that if we can figure that out as a system, as a sector, what we'll see will be transformational, and it's the secret sauce to our work. Really,
well, I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you for your wise insights, and get people in the room. Henrik, do we have any questions at the moment?
We have some questions came in and Alex responded to them. One was about enrollment, whether enrollment for post-secondary education is down and by how much, and whether there is data available for foster youth. And again, the question is whether is it really down or not. And then some resources were posted by Marjorie Parker and Melinda. And that's it.
Okay, so let's make sure we capture these, the group chat in the recording, or at least copy and paste it, and we can get those resources out to people. Again, thank you very much for joining us. If you think of a question, pop it in the chat room. We got a little bit of time to do it, but in the meantime, let's roll the slide there, Henrik. We thought the 67 or so of you that are in the room wanted to know a little bit about who you are. 42% are from CBOs, 29% workforce, 16% post-secondary, 5% philanthropy, and 5% from intermediaries. And then roll on to the next slide. You remember when you signed up, we asked you what the barriers and issues were. This is what you told us. These are the words that are that come out when we take all of your responses to that question. And I thought it'd be interesting to sort of look at what people see as the, and they came up in our discussions here. Access was an issue. The need for persistence is an issue, housing, food, insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. In response to what the solutions were, click to the next slide. These are the things that you said needed to be in place to get the job done. We need more opportunities, more education, jobs, good programs, skills training. We need to be working with employers in better and deeper ways, et cetera, et cetera. Apprenticeships, post-secondary connections, technology. So actually at this point, if there are there any questions for the panel? Then let me introduce Brett Halverson. Brett's a good friend of mine who 20 some odd years ago I invited to be the chair of the New Ways to Work board when I got the opportunity to take it and run it. And Brett and Robert are going to take us through talking about next steps. And Henrik, you're going to want to roll to the next slide.
Okay. First of all, let me thank both our partners who put this together, as well as Keisha and Laurie for framing this, both in terms of the data and in terms of the young people, and for our terrific board members who have exhibited why they bring such great talent to the board. Before I turn it over to Robert, I just wanted to make a couple of reflections on what I heard from this, or what I think needs to be more explicit, is I think that it's clear that the challenges will need us to do stuff differently while building on things that have worked in the past. And I think an example on the screen where you see something New Ways developed about 20 years ago, All Youth One System, is still relevant, but how it's adapted to the current environment. I think one of the things that this session I think really reinforces is in developing strategies and to raise the voice of the needs of young people, it needs to be more bottom up rather than top down. There are too many people driving the conversation who are not sort of putting it into practice. And so I think Steve's last question about collaboration, I think, was right on point. of if we're going to do collaborative work, it requires people to facilitate that both at the local, state, and national level. And I think practitioners need to be an integral part of that, rather than, it obviously has to be data driven, but how do you do it? How do you build on what has been done before? And how will you get better outcomes for young people? And I think that's part of the challenge that I think we started with, and why we wanted to start this conversation with a group of people that are doing this work every day. And as Robert assumes the responsibility for New Ways as of January 2nd, I think we will start to roll out some other things. And we do want to recognize the enormous contribution that Steve Trippy has made to the field and to New Ways in a time that it's been challenging to do these things. And so let me turn it over to Robert with those few comments.
Thank you, Brett. And again, I want to say my thanks to the panel. It was probably not a lot of things that we don't know intuitively, but being able to share what is happening collectively to me is the key. The data that Keisha have brought us is shocking. I mean, we know it's bad, but to actually have it on paper and have it confirmed of how bad it is, and this was dated, so we know it's only going to get worse before it gets better. I do think that we have to share that data. We have to be able to share our resources, but also just this information. So whatever meetings, and I'm sure Keisha will definitely want us to talk about the New Deal for Youth. And we need to follow the leadership of our national organizations like CLASP. I've been a fan for the last 20 years, and what they do on the national policy level is great pieces of work. And so being able to expand that, and for us to join and add our voices at that national level. They mentioned advocacy, we mentioned collaboration, but what didn't actually get mentioned was leadership. And so we need all of you who are great leaders to actually provide a leadership in this advocacy, and not to be afraid to raise our voices. And when we talked about the stimulus plan that had come out, yes, young adults were allowed to participate, but we're not called out. And then we did a lot of local leadership, as Lori talked about, of translating that information and telling 18 to 24-year-olds around Los Angeles that they can apply, and doing specific workshops for them and how they could access these resources. So we need your leadership at the national level. We need your leadership at the state level. The work that Melinda led in New York State is and will continue to be a national model of being able to squeeze out general fund dollars at a state level. It was difficult before. It's going to be even more difficult as we talk about the recovery and getting general fund dollars. But I could not imagine the work that was needed to be done at that level in New York State, and being able to bring in the local folks, the leadership that Marjorie has been doing at New York City, the reports. And I've been invited out a couple of times to speak to their groups, and they're 100 strong, if not more, all in the room, all committed, and having, the micro, I would say, focus on their particular neighborhoods. But it takes local leadership at that regional level to actually be, to make this piece work. So as New Ways and as an organization, we have some fabulous directors, and we've been adding and strengthening that, but it's all for the purpose of lending our voice at a national level to support folks at the state level. Charlene, who was a former staff member of New Ways and now is a state leader there, really embodies about how to do this. And I've always heard her say the New Ways piece. And that secret sauce has really been about bringing people together, allowing them to speak their voice, having a collective plan of action, and then implementing. doing the work and actually providing that leadership on the ground. So I do look forward to continue to partake and to be a part of these efforts at this crisis moment. Our young adults need us. We need them, and we need them to be speaking their own voice. And as Lori has been very, how would be the right term, has demonstrated at the local level of bringing young people together to speak for themselves. For how do we capture that on video? How do we coach them? How do we actually bring their voices into it? Is another critical part to all of this. So I want to thank you all. We will be able to get the information out as Steve has said, and then we'll be continuing this conversation. We wanted to lay this framework, and the specific recommendations as we move forward is going to be truly a collective activity. So thank you.